Today I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. Are animal sources or plant sources of protein best to make gains? I know a lot of athletes are hesitant to start a vegan diet as they feel plant sources of protein are inadequate for muscle growth and recovery. So today I wanted to go over the research and refute some of the misinformation on this topic so you can make an informed decision. Firstly, let's cover the myth that vegan sources of protein are incomplete. Literally every single food source has a complete amino acid profile, with the exception of gelatin. It's missing the amino acid tryptophan. The idea that vegans have to combine protein sources to get a complete amino acid profile was a myth popularized by Vogue back in 1975, not exactly an accurate source of information, so no one has to worry about getting incomplete sources of protein and having to mix protein sources as a vegan. So now let's get into some of the science behind protein and muscle growth. Since protein is the only macronutrient that contains nitrogen and the majority of protein in your body is found in muscle tissue, nitrogen balance is a very accurate way of determining whether or not you're consuming an adequate amount of protein. Thus, the most important dietary factor in muscle growth is maintaining a positive nitrogen balance. That is, more nitrogen is entering your system than is being excreted, which ensures you're consuming enough protein to build muscle at an optimal rate. Since maintaining a positive nitrogen balance is the most important dietary factor in muscle growth, this should be your main consideration as to whether plant sources of protein are adequate for muscle growth, and research has shown that plant sources of protein are at least equivalent to animal sources of protein in maintaining a positive nitrogen balance. So this is a pretty good indication that plant sources of protein are just as good at building muscle as animal sources of protein. Now, some of you might ask, but what about the bioavailability of a protein source? Does that matter? Well, the bioavailability of a protein source might reflect its ability to help one maintain a positive nitrogen balance, and since bioavailability might reflect nitrogen balance, this could be an important factor in determining whether or not plant or animal sources of protein are superior. Milk-derived casein, egg white powder, and soy protein isolate are all considered to have the highest protein bioavailability, which might explain why the study found that substituting animal protein with soy protein isolate had no effect on nitrogen balance, but lentils, which have half the supposed protein bioavailability of egg whites or casein, still had the same effects on nitrogen balance as compared to animal-derived sources of protein. So despite many plant sources of protein having less bioavailability, this doesn't seem to have any effect on nitrogen balance and thus muscle growth. And lastly, what about amino acid ratios? Many plant sources of protein are lacking in certain amino acids, so does this have any effect on muscle growth? It doesn't appear so, at least not when you're consuming an overall high protein intake, which is appropriate for strength athletes. A rice protein supplement had equivalent effects on muscle growth and strength gains as compared to a whey protein supplement, as did a pea protein supplement. So again, plant sources of protein are equivalent in terms of building muscle mass as compared to animal sources of protein. So why should you choose to consume only plant sources of protein as opposed to animal sources when they're both just as good at building muscle mass? Well, plant sources of protein don't cause an early death, and this is due to animal-derived sources of protein containing harmful nutrients like saturated fat and cholesterol, and animal protein itself promotes cancer cell growth through numerous pathways, including IGF-1, and let's not forget about the ethical and environmental benefits to switching to plant sources of protein. What's the point of harming animals and harming the environment when you can reach all of your goals on a plant-based diet? I encourage all of you to switch to plant sources of protein, not just for health reasons, but to also ensure that your gains don't require the suffering and death of others.